Okay, so we have Joel back. I am slowly getting back into leverage after a couple of weeks off, but I just thought the perfect person to have Joel back, not only to snap me out of my
Are you in a funk?
maybe I was a little bit of a funk.
Okay.
I wonder why. We're not going to talk about
No,
that.
no,
No,
no.
no, no. But also because the market is, I think the word you used was non-existent. So Joel Kadish, my unofficial co-star,
Thank you so much.
is back to.
It's been a minute. I'm
It
so
has
glad
been
to
a
be,
minute. Actually,
and I'm
it's been
glad
a
to be
while.
back. I'm
And
glad to be back. Yeah.
I mean, Max and I were both very excited to have you back. So we talked about it a while back over another another deal we were doing, but I thought it would be good to chat about closings, which I get asked all the time, like, what's normal?
Sure.
Okay, so 30-day, 60-day, 90-day. How many months is normal? What's a long closing? What's a short closing? And then deposits, that mystery idea that you get to keep the money just because it's sitting in a brokerage. And I think it's super important to talk about it right now because the market is it's really quiet.
It's quiet.
Affordability. I actually had a client the other day ask me, like, why? And not that she's a very intelligent woman, but when you're in the moment of like, I need to sell my place, and I 6 months ago I was seeing stuff sell, and then all of a sudden things aren't selling. What changed? And the reality is that affordability, and this is what I said to her, was it costs you 3 times more than it did to fill up your gas tank. It costs you 10 times more to go to the grocery store. There's a hilarious meme going around about like, it costs $500 just to leave your house now. And it's like, haha, you send it to a friend. But the reality is, like, I tell clients all the time, they're like, oh, I want to do this, or I want to replace the floors, or I want windows. I'm like, I used to be like, it would be about this much money,
Yeah,
right? I'd be
yeah.
like, you're probably looking, $25,000 to $30,000, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, what? I'm like, I won't quote anything anymore because everything is so expensive. Someone, honest guy the other day went to recaulk the bathtub in a client's house that was being listed, and he wanted $150. And they're like, what? And I'm like, well, the time, the materials, whatever. So
I think
all that to be said,
affordability. I just want to reflect on one thing. In 2021, we did so many deals, right? So during COVID, we did an abnormal amount of
I think
deals.
I doubled my mileage on my car that year.
In 21, right? So we have this overabundance of deals, and then we have, let's assume, somewhere between a 1-year mortgage and a 5-year mortgage. And what's really scaring me is that these mortgages are coming up for renewal at rates that are probably double or triple what they signed on for, right?
Well, now I remember a client saying to me when they bought 3 years ago that they got like 2.25, right? Sure. Fixed. They got it. And I remember thinking to myself, that's crazy. Why wouldn't you just go to a variable at 1.5, right?
100%.
Which, by the way, everybody was doing,
did.
and why we're feeling it. But by the way, it's not their fault.
No.
On some level, we all have to acknowledge that the government said, go ahead, we're going to keep it down. And hence, again, I'm getting ahead of myself, not what we're talking about today, but why there's so little consumer confidence about what's happening.
And so the question is, are we going to have like these negative amortized mortgages?
Well,
where
if they
the
don't want
balance
people
is,
going under.
right.
If they don't want people
Right.
drowning. And this is Tuesday. Tomorrow will be the rate
Rate
announcement.
announcement.
They're not going to raise it.
No.
And someone said to me, well, do you think that's going to help? And I said, no.
No.
I said, because
not at all.
it doesn't alleviate your gas prices. Everyone is like this. They're just clinging. Not everyone, but I don't.
No, but the
I
people-
don't even think it's the people that just bought houses. I think people are focusing on that. But if you look across the board,
Oh, yeah.
and I have friends
Yeah.
in every tax bracket,
Yeah.
and there are people even in that 1% who are like, oh my Lord.
It was like this assumption about affordability that people made that that day was frozen in time, that the interest rates were never going to go up this much, and that inflation and shrinkflation.
We hadn't seen it in decades.
No,
Think about it. We
no,
hadn't
no.
really.
No.
We
Not since the really early 90s, like 90 through 94, we saw it. The 08, 09, there was a blip. It's sort of a little thing happens, but not really here. But this is very serious. And I really am feeling, this entire like clenching of the collective gut,
What's
people,
next?
yeah. And people, I think, in all tax brackets, and I think you're right about that, are afraid. They're actually afraid because they can't predict what their incomes are going to be. If your mortgage payment doubles, your income is surely
you can't go to your boss and be like, I need a raise.
By the way, you got to double my raise.
And then it reverberates. So, someone was asking me about my predictions for the rate increases. And I said, well, they're not going to do it because literally I think they would bankrupt people. Like,
it's going to happen.
I mean, and we all know the Bank of Canada is supposed to be and is, I hope, I say that is a regulatory body that stands by itself. It's an independent, it is not, but you now have open letters from people like Doug Ford going, don't do it,
What are you doing?
Don't
What
do
are
it.
you doing?
Like, let's get together. And I say this truly out of hope for my clients, for the economy, for the future of Canada over the next couple of years. I do hope that the government comes together and figures out how to manage this better, because the rest of the year, someone just wrote in this chat that I'm in for real estate agents. They said, what's your prediction? 3, 6, not like 12 months. Yeah. And so next 3 months, the toilet. Sorry. Yeah. It's not going to get better. I have been honest with my clients. If you need to sell, drop your price, do what you need to do, sell. 6 months, I am hopeful with historical trends that spring is just always a better time. You're going to have more people out. Yeah. And the government gets their act together and starts to look at potentially dropping rates if they can. And then 12 months, I mean, I'd be a millionaire because everyone would stop using everybody else, because I have no idea what's going to happen in 12 months. No. But that's my hope. Yeah. And they're not going to raise it in December. They'd kill the retail. They would kill Christmas. Retail's already feeling it. Who's going out to dinner anymore?
You know what?
What was the last time you went to dinner?
I took a client out for dinner on King Street. Nice. And I have been to this restaurant before, and the waiter basically told me, we got no business. We're empty. And so
King Street is pretty strong.
I know.
Yeah.
And so, and the other thing that I always like to talk about, which is interesting, is, you and I, we work in the GTA, but in Ontario, and then if you go outside of Ontario into other provinces, it's terrible, right? And we always have this very GTA centric that we talk about, but when you get into other regions of Ontario, it's terrible.
Yeah,
like properties, properties are not selling.
Oh,
nobody's buying.
We just started talking about cottage country. We could do a whole other one on that.
Of course.
And that's why I think it's important to kind of touch on these two subjects, because people who do need to sell over the next 6 months will be, if they're lucky, I hate to say it, potentially presented with an offer that's not clean. We're not going to get into clauses and all of that stuff, but what I want to focus on too, which was closings. Yeah. You can tell me what your opinion is. I always say anything between 30 and 90 days I'm comfortable with.
So I describe closings like a dance or a song. They have a cadence and a rhythm. Okay. Once I see it getting beyond 90 or, anything beyond that, I think this is a different dance. So I got to look at why. Well, why is the dance different? Why is it 120? Why is it 180? And then I start to ask more questions than I otherwise would.
So I think I say to client, they'll say to me, well, what's the problem with the long closing? Right. So, I mean, first I would say to you, you are taking a risk of, I always just think like, what if your house like floods? What if you're like, I always think like, and by the way, as a buyer, like you're buying a property, you want a long closing. I don't want to see you with a long closing representing a buyer that, God forbid, something happens to that house. And now
what about just, the partner loses a job between now and then? All of a sudden your income's not what it was.
And you're not going to get approved for your mortgage.
And then, your pre-approval is now not good anymore. Right. Or what if a buyer just says, you know what, I'm going to leave the deposit on the table. I can't close because we lost a job and we can't carry now. And so the longer...
Which, by the way, they don't actually do. They try to sue to get it back. But anyway, we'll discuss that after.
We'll talk about that in a minute. But, the longer we go, I think the more uncertainties we have about everything. And whether it's physical damage, whether it's life changes.
Well, I think your point about also the financing, like, so you sell your house, they come to you with a financing clause and they waive it. They go, no problem, we've got our financing. Forget the job. Like someone has their job, they lose their job. But so then you say, okay, but what happens when the bank's slow to do the inspection and the assessment? And they're like, oh, by the way, the market just tanked and we all just saw how it went over a cup. And it does, by the way, but thank God it can also go the other way. But that's what happens with this business. So from 1 week to the next, it can really change. So, I had this conversation with a client the other day who was like, that wanted a certain amount of money for their property. And I said, one of the things you're going to have a challenge with, as much as we think based on a comp that was sold 6 months ago, and we may be very valid in what we believe in a better market, in this market, whoever's going to put their offer in, it's going to have a bank who's going to come in and use the comparable from last week.
Of course.
Not 6 months ago. Absolutely. And those people will be, and for all that don't know this, you get approved for on paper until they go in and do the assessment. And if they decide that you paid $300,000 more than they think that house is worth, you're on the hook for $300,000.
I always tell people,
or you have to default.
A pre-approval is
nothing.
You can borrow this much money.
Yeah.
But
in theory,
actual,
in theory.
An actual approval is
Only
I can borrow this much money against this particular house.
Right.
That's a different story. That may involve an appraisal. It may involve an inspection.
Yeah.
It may involve any number of things that the bank. Remember, appraisers are the same as lawyers and accountants. They're a professional body, right? They can get sued if they give appraisals wrong. So many times the whole economic feel impacts how they do their appraisals. So they're going to pull in the reins a little. They're going to appraise things a little tighter, a little lower, because they don't want to take a risk that a bank is one day going to scrutinize their appraisal and say, you appraised it for too high, but you were negligent.
But don't you think it's hilarious that the whole process, and we're so going off the rails, but I think this is an important topic, like they take 10 minutes in a condo, they take 20 minutes in a house.
If you're lucky.
Thank you. If you're lucky, they come in, they've got a clipboard, check, 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 check. Oh, granite counters, 4-piece bathroom, this. And then the next thing you know.
And in certain places in Ontario, there may be 3 appraisers that work a huge geographic area. And even from a timing perspective, getting them out can be difficult, and then getting the right work done. And we see these problems come up.
It happened to me when I bought our second cottage. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't much, but they appraised our cottage. I bought it. I represented myself. I'll tell you right now, I did not overpay for it. And we got an incredible deal. Yeah. And the appraiser came back and evaluated it $40,000 less. Like, I fought with them, and they were like, and I remember calling a bunch of agents that I'm friends with in that area, and they were like, yeah, that guy's brutal, blah, 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 whatever. It's got notorious, whatever. And by the way, nothing I could do about it. I coughed up the $40,000, and I was lucky that I had it, but there are people who don't have it.
Ability to pay, right? How deep are your pockets? And,
what you're saying, if you can write a check and make it go away. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, again, this is not what we intended to talk about, but as all these pre-construction condos that people signed their agreements 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and they're now coming to close now, the appraisals are different, the rates are different. And all these people they made an assumption that the interest rates were going to be the same as the day they signed their agreements.
Joel's the only real estate lawyer you can have who come on, and we'll just talk about the market.
Yeah,
it's just going to be a mishmash. Because now let's get into and I kept saying also, for a long time, I was like, I don't like pre-construction. I don't like pre-construction. I would tell
you got deep pockets.
I'm like, I would tell clients, like first-time buyers, they'd be like, I don't know, maybe I should just do pre-construction. I'm like, don't do it. I've had lawyers call me and say, I need your help with something. We have to sue the builder. Tell me if this is normal, whatever, fine. The whole contract is in the builder. And then in the last year, 2 years, since COVID, things are going crazy. Prices still keep going up. Now the interest rates are up. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I have to be a little kinder. Maybe I have to look at other options. And I started to say, you know what, to my team, we actually should start to really get into pre-construction. Not in a big way, but like have a couple of projects that we trust, that we can go and say, you know what, for clients who come to us, you know, we have a couple that we feel good with. And then the Mizrahi. And then this comes up, and I'm like, last week, and I'm like...
Everything you thought you knew, you don't know.
No, and then I'm like, nope, I was right. I should not doubt myself. The reality is, and this was, listen, marred from the beginning. We talked about this. Nothing over the 40th floor was sold. It had delays. But for anybody out there thinking about it, only 20% of your deposit is covered by Tarion, and then you lose everything else.
Well, so there's excess deposit insurance, which may or may not be in place for some of these people. Okay. And you got to consult with your lawyer. And, you know, this thing's going to be...
But they're going to file for bankruptcy.
Well, there's going to be a receiver that gets appointed. And the question is whether the receiver rescinds or cancels all the agreements, or whether the receiver elects to try and keep the agreements and then finish the project. These things get very twisted and very complicated, and they take forever. But
so you're out all your money.
But the point is, sometimes whatever we thought we knew and whatever expectations we had of the market can change so radically, so fast that we really have to evaluate long before we sign our agreements and long, you know, can we withstand the storm? And you know, when we're talking about long closings, that's where there is so much uncertainty, right? And people feel comforted. They say, well, you know, I got a big deposit. So let's jump into what that means and what it does.
Well, and you will hear, so the minimum deposit is 5%.
Sure.
By the way, outside of Toronto.
Not that. Nah, people give $2,000.
Which I would, no. So it's 5%, and that could be a lot of money depending on what you're buying. Sure. And I've had clients.
But at $1 million, $1.5 million, let's say $1 million is the average, you know, for something.
Well, no, but, I mean, you can't buy much for under $1 million.
So now, at $1 million, that's your deposit.
Right. So you've got, there's your deposit. And we can now kind of chat about a deal that we had together not so long ago, where the buyer got cold feet 24 hours after dropping that deposit.
Right away.
Yeah. Any agents out there who think that they should wait until Monday to get a deposit, never wait for a deposit. So because we had the deposit, we on some level had an upper hand to say, listen, we're not going to just give it back. We're not going to let you out of it. And then they had to decide what they wanted to do. But I think that there's a misconception out there that if someone doesn't close for whatever reason, that they're at fault, I get the deposit.
You don't get the deposit. It's not happening.
Right. So it's held in trust by the listing brokerage.
And the listing brokerage says, I love all of you, and you're all right. And because you're all right, the buyer and the seller, you're both right. I'm not going to argue with either of you. I'm also not going to give either of you the money until one of two things happen: a court order or a mutual release. Right. So what does this mean? It means either a negotiation or you go to court. And so people say, well, what do you mean court? I'm like, yeah, in 2 years, after you'll wish, you know, you would never seen a litigation lawyer.
And you've spun through the deposit.
Yeah, paying illegal absolutely. Fees. And you know, they literally get paid by the hour. There's no flat rates. There's no contingency fees. You'll really think about, well, I should have just negotiated a deal and done that. And the other thing that we have talked about, you and I, is that deals are not conditional on the delivery of a deposit. Once a deal is signed,
you're in breach
if you don't deliver the deposit, you're in breach of contract and be responsible for damages. So on the seller side, you know, you go and resell for less, and you resell it for less, which has happened to a client of mine. And then are you going to sue for the difference? Like, it's such a... It's
only happened
lawsuits
to me
are terrible.
Once. It only happened to me once, and it was on a property right when COVID hit.
Yeah.
So like it was like now, nothing was selling, and the guy had a horrible agent, and he called the next morning. He said, "My client's not doing it. He's not dropping off the deposit."
Yeah.
And I was like, I walked through all, and he's like, I don't care.
Yeah, I don't care.
I don't care. They're not bringing it. Do what you need to do, kind of thing. I don't even think he knew what that meant.
He didn't.
And I called my clients and I said, listen, they're 100% in breach of contract. They're 100% wrong. But now is the question, like, are you going to sue? Like, listen, and I have clients who are lawyers who will be like, oh yeah, fuck yes. I'm going to go and sue them 100% because it's not going to cost them anything. But the reality is the average person, you're not going to sue them.
Yeah.
You're not going to.
I mean, I had somebody sue over 10 grand, which was the sale difference, and they went to small claims court. And I
just going to say, can you go to small claims court?
You can. You absolutely can. But the jurisdiction of small claims court is so small. But you could theoretically, if the number was small and you wanted to, but there's the time and the emotion.
Exactly. Move on.
And I'm a move on kind of person. With certain exceptions, the deal we had was really one of those exceptions. Was not a move on. It was a dig in.
Yeah, it was
we dug in, and they eventually closed on time. At the right price, but not without. Our client was older, and it really caused
stressful
a lot of consternation.
Horrible. It was
bad for her. And
really
I always talk
she
about
worried
the
till
human
the
cost.
Last morning.
Absolutely, human costs.
Horrible.
There are human costs to litigation. I always say, like, if two big companies sue each other, who cares? A patent infringement or whatever, what have you, a competition bureau against Loblaws, nobody cares. But when two humans actually sue each other, there's human costs on both sides that I think are quite honestly underestimated. How much emotion and how much time, and you're going to be in your lawyer's office, and you're going to get cross-examined, and all of these things are just incredibly uncomfortable and time-consuming. So you're going to spend time away from your job where you actually make money, and the karma is terrible. You and I always talk about the universe, but the karma of this is all bad. It's negative. And it's horrible. So if you can move on, move on.
Yes. No, for sure. But write the check. Just write the check.
But if you can't move on, there are times you dig your heels in, and you make sure that you're well represented. You make sure you understand the process from start to finish, the timing, the costs.
Right.
And you really got to work with somebody you have some confidence in, because these files are difficult.
Well, and by the way, I also say, like, there are agents that I've worked with, will work with, where there's things that you need to work out, that you have trust that person is professional, has the experience, everyone's moving towards the right, all that stuff. And then you have agents where you're like, no, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. It's missing clauses. Like, there's red flags.
And, I hate to talk about law, but because I don't like to...
Because you're a lawyer?
No, but the legal specific... but I'm going to talk about something called specific performance. And so that's when a buyer forces a seller to close. So let's say you buy a property.
By the way, have you ever had that? Where a seller didn't close?
Yeah, so we have sometimes when sellers don't close.
Why?
And then the buyer says, lots of different reasons.
Okay.
But the buyer says, I want that property. But the Supreme Court of Canada, with little exception, has sort of said, no, you don't get that property, you get damages. Because nothing is that unique in real estate.
Oh, they're not going to, right. Yeah. They're just like, this is what they owe you, move on, find a new place.
So I found a new place, I paid more for it. But clients will often say, no, I want that. We're going to force them to close. No such thing. No such thing in reality. The reality is, if a seller doesn't want to close, you can sue them for damages that you incurred, which are actual out-of-pocket expenses. It's Canada, it's not California, so we don't get like human suffering, pain and suffering. None of that happens in Ontario in real estate law. But we do have to remember that chances are, if the seller doesn't want to close, you're not going to get that specific property, with very few exceptions. So it can happen on both sides of the fence. We have had sellers not close for various reasons.
I've never had that happen.
Because sometimes, even if you think about a divorce, and our friend Anna Maria could talk about this, but sometimes we just had a situation where one spouse was sort of refusing to leave the property, and they had to run to court to get a court order to evict the spouse. But this was a situation where, frankly, I had to tell the clients, you may not get this property and you may end up with a case in damages, which doesn't help you at all. And they would have lost their interest rate. And once you lose your interest rate, your payments, because...
Yeah, and then you have more to sue for,
oh,
for
my
sure.
God. Because he was telling me he told me the difference in the interest rate. Like, I need to close on this date. And if I don't close on this date, I lose my rate.
Listen, what I will say is, though, I think that if you do have something that was out of the ordinary, or you trusted it, or you were going to go for it, I don't think that there's any guarantee you'll get the deposit. But if the buyer has given you a 20% deposit, let's just say that.
Sure.
And I always say to clients, deposits are just really a sign of commitment, right? Like I explained, if you gave me $1,000 and something else came up and I was going to save $10,000, I'll walk away from $1,000, right?
At law, we call them genuine pre-estimates of damages.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there's case law on, like, let's say you gave a 25% deposit.
Yeah.
That you would actually get some of it back because it isn't a genuine pre-estimate of damages. And there's sort of case law around 10 or 12% that's roughly the cutoff number. Because at some point, it's not your damages anymore. You're actually going to make money.
Right. And fair. I think what I was trying to get at was, if you have just that 5% deposit and that person is like, okay, I don't want to. No, it's skin in the game,
yeah.
And like I don't want to lose. Listen, I don't want to lose $25,000.
I don't.
But if they have $100,000 with you, it's amazing how like attitude can change.
I
right?
always say 100,000 reasons to close.
Right. So 100,000, and we talked about obviously like there have been instances where and we've gotten into like that kind of 11th hour where you're trying to figure something out and you'll be like, okay, I'll give it to you.
Yeah.
I'll give you an extension.
Yep.
But I want a $50,000 like non-refundable.
Correct.
Right. So those are, they don't happen often, but they can be a
let's
solution.
talk about what a non-refundable deposit is. A non-refundable deposit isn't payable to the real estate brokerage. It'll either be payable to the lawyer and then immediately given out or directly out.
Right.
And that means if for whatever reason the deal doesn't close, that part of the deposit is gone.
Which happens.
It does happen.
Because you might have a buyer who's like, oh my God, I need to like just extend this. I'm in big trouble, whatever. And you're like, I'll do whatever you need me to do. Right. And you're like, great, I need $50,000. And they're like, no problem. Because they're about to.
I needed X dollars to pay Y debt.
Yeah.
And that debt is now going to double if I don't pay it. It's Larry the loan shark. I got to pay him today. And, from the sale proceeds. And I expected that money to come. So now I need you to replace that money, essentially.
So
non-refundable deposit is out there. It's hard to do, but again, on extension, we say we don't like long closings because there's so much uncertainty. And look at how much
But it's
things
also just
can
not
change.
necessary. I think what you have to ask is like,
why?
30 days is a nice, tight closing, fine. But you know what? A lot of people need 60 or 90 because they need to sell something.
I got it.
No problem. All good. There is absolutely no reason why someone really needs a 5-month closing.
They don't.
They don't.
They don't.
So if they're asking for it, it's a red flag.
It's exceptional. And
Joel and I could talk about this
I don't
all day.
like exceptions.
Okay, so takeaways.
Go.
One is you do not automatically get to keep the deposit.
You don't.
Don't assume it.
You don't get the property and you don't get the deposit.
Right.
Both sides.
Always try to go for a healthy deposit. I would take, if you had 2 offers exactly the same and one of them was giving you a bigger deposit, I would take the bigger deposit. I would take the bigger deposit. Even though you don't get it, skin in the game. Okay.
Beautiful.
Exactly. 30, 60, 90 days is it.
Yeah.
There's no other reason why you need to change the dance.
And you know what?
And the market is not going well right now.
So the one thing I can tell you is
those are your takeaways.
My takeaway also is I need better advisors. Like you have exceptional people who come on your podcast. And I think during these times you can't have average people working with you. You really need the top of the game. Why? Because they have lived through it, because they have experienced it, because they've seen lots of things, and because if you're experts, if you're a lawyer, if you're accountant, you've had wealth management people, you've had any number of great professionals on. If they're not willing to take the time with you to help you understand where you are in the market, then I think you need to reconsider your relationships because they're working for you, right? We work for clients. We do.
Yes.
Do
you know how many times I've been on the phone with agents who call me and I said, can I just ask you a question? They're like, sure. I go, how long have you been doing this?
Exactly.
And I'm not giving them a shot. And they go, oh, I got a license 2 years ago. And I go,
it's not a shot.
And I'm like, call me intent. Like, because they keep saying the market, the market, the market. I'm like, live through it. And I think that that's the most important is like the people that I'm talking to on a regular basis now that the market has changed is very much about the people who have lived through this several times. Like
and to plug leverage, if you go back through leverage and you see some of these episodes and some of the
Joel to do this.
So no, I don't. I'm being serious, but some of the value that comes out of it, you know, you need to reach out to these people, you know, even before you're considering your move, and you need to say to them, "What if?" And they'll help you through. You know, I help lots of clients who don't work with me right now because I really want them to be successful. And based on their success, I'm going to be more successful. But I think really now is crunch time. We need better experts. We need people who want to work with us, who take this as seriously as we do right across the board. And if your banker's blowing you off,
call a mortgage broker.
Find somebody
Try another
else.
bank.
Right.
100%. I agree with you.
And you know, people do more research like when they buy a TV.
I know, isn't it crazy?
It's crazy. So do the same kind of due diligence. Get out there, do your research, talk to your friends and family, talk to people who in your circle of influence, find out who they like to work with. But honestly, like
interview. By the way, interview.
Of course, interview a lawyer, interview,
all of them.
And if it's not a fit, if from day one you're like, I'm not comfortable. Not everybody loves Kadish, right? And that's okay. I live with that, and my therapist. Not everyone loves Kadish. My therapist and I are fine with that. But my point really is that you really do have to find a fit. This is the biggest financial transaction of your life. We take it. I know how seriously we take it, but get that advice. Slow down, don't rush, and make sure during these times that's the right fit. No one's rushing right now. I know, but even if you've got that feeling like I got to get on the ladder, you know that pressure.
Yeah. Thank you, Joel.
Oh, bless you. See you next time.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We have to come up with a good next time.
Cottages.
Oh,
we're going to talk about roach allowances. We're going to talk.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.